Have you ever walked away from a conversation only to replay every single word in your mind? You tell yourself it doesn't matter, but hours later, you're still thinking about it. Maybe you wonder if you should have explained yourself better. Maybe you wish you had found the perfect words. Maybe you hope that if people could only understand your intentions, they would finally stop judging you. And without realizing it, you begin carrying invisible conversations everywhere you go. You rehearse arguments that will never happen. You prepare explanations no one asked for. You defend decisions that were never on trial. You spend precious hours trying to win cases inside a courtroom that exists only in your own mind. It feels exhausting, because it is. The strange part is that most people don't even notice they're doing it. They believe they are simply being responsible, being polite, being fair. But underneath those explanations often hides something much deeper. The fear of being misunderstood, the fear of disappointing someone, the fear of looking selfish, the fear of being seen as the villain in someone else's story. So you explain. You explain why you left the relationship. You explain why you changed careers. You explain why you said no. You explain why you need space. You explain why you cannot always be available. Then something curious happens. The more you explain, the more you feel the need to keep explaining. Because you are trying to solve a problem that words were never meant to solve. Not everyone wants to understand you. Some people only want to confirm the opinion they already formed long before you opened your mouth. Think about that for a moment. How many nights have you sacrificed, trying to change a mind that had already decided who you were? How many mornings have begun with anxiety? Because you were preparing yourself to justify choices that belonged only to you? How much energy has disappeared, not because life was difficult, but because you kept carrying the impossible responsibility of controlling how other people perceived you? Most people believe suffering comes from criticism. The Stoics saw something different. They believed suffering begins the moment you decide that another person's opinion has the authority to define your peace. That changes everything. Because if your peace depends on being understood, you will never truly be free. There will always be another conversation, another accusation, another misunderstanding, another stranger who interprets your silence as arrogance, another friend who mistakes your boundaries for rejection, another family member who cannot accept that you have changed. If your happiness depends on correcting every misunderstanding, your happiness will always belong to someone else. This is why so many intelligent people remain emotionally exhausted, not because they lack wisdom, but because they keep spending their emotional energy on battles that cannot be won. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire, yet even he reminded himself that people would criticize him no matter how wisely he acted. Epictetus was born a slave, yet he discovered a freedom that no emperor could grant and no critic could take away. Seneca lived surrounded by politics, ambition, and public judgment. Still, he warned that the person who constantly seeks approval slowly becomes owned by the opinions of others. 3 different lives, 3 different circumstances, 1 timeless lesson. Your character matters infinitely more than your reputation, because your reputation lives inside someone else's mind. Your character lives inside your own. One can be stolen overnight, the other can only be surrendered. Perhaps no one has ever told you this before. You are allowed to let people misunderstand you. You are allowed to disappoint expectations that were never yours to fulfill. You are allowed to outgrow the version of yourself that made everyone comfortable. You are allowed to walk away without writing a speech that explains every decision. This is not arrogance. It is not coldness. It is not selfishness. It is emotional maturity. There comes a moment in every life when you must choose between 2 impossible goals: being understood by everyone, or being honest with yourself. You cannot always have both, and the day you stop sacrificing your peace in exchange for other people's approval, something remarkable begins to happen. Your mind becomes quieter, your heart becomes lighter, your words become fewer, but your presence becomes stronger, because there is a confidence that cannot be created through perfect explanations. It can only be built through unwavering character. That is the path the Stoics walked more than 2,000 years ago, and despite everything that has changed since then, human nature has not. People still fear rejection. People still crave approval. People still lose themselves trying to control what was never theirs to control. But you don't have to continue living that way. Tonight, before this conversation ends, you may discover that the peace you've been searching for was never hidden inside better arguments. It was waiting. On the other side of silence. Have you ever noticed that some of the most exhausting conversations in your life never actually happened? No one raised their voice. No one stood in front of you. No one demanded an explanation. Yet your mind kept talking for hours, maybe even for days. You replayed a moment over and over again, searching for different words you could have used. You imagined how someone interpreted your silence. You wondered if they thought you were selfish, ungrateful, cold, or weak. Without realizing it, you became both the accused and the defense attorney inside your own mind, and the trial never ended. This invisible habit follows millions of people every single day. They leave work and continue working inside their thoughts. They leave an argument, but carry it home. They leave a relationship, yet continue explaining themselves to someone who is no longer listening. The body walks away. The mind stays behind. Have you ever asked yourself why? Why does being misunderstood feel so painful? Why does a stranger's opinion sometimes linger longer than the words of someone who truly loves you? Why do you feel an almost irresistible urge to correct every false impression people have about you? The answer has very little to do with logic. It has everything to do with something much older. Long before cities existed, before technology, before written philosophy, our ancestors survived because they belonged to a tribe. Being accepted often meant survival. Being rejected could mean death. Your brain still carries echoes of that ancient world. It still reacts to social rejection as if your life depends on it. When someone misunderstands you, your nervous system doesn't simply register an opinion, it senses danger, not physical danger, emotional danger, the possibility that you might lose connection, respect, or belonging. And because your mind wants to eliminate that discomfort, it immediately begins searching for explanations. If only they knew what I really meant. If only I could explain it one more time. If only they understood my intentions. These thoughts feel reasonable, even noble, but look carefully. How many times have they actually brought you peace? Perhaps you've experienced this before. You carefully explain your decision. The other person nods. For a brief moment you feel relieved. Then they ask another question. So you explain again, then another and another. Soon you are no longer sharing your truth. You are negotiating your right to have one. That is the moment something precious begins to disappear, your inner authority. The Stoics understood that the moment your peace depends on another person's agreement, your peace no longer belongs to you. Epictetus often reminded his students that we suffer not because people think differently, but because we believe they shouldn't. Think about how much of your life has been shaped by invisible expectations. Perhaps you chose a career because it sounded respectable. Perhaps you stayed in a relationship because leaving would disappoint your family. Perhaps you remained silent because speaking honestly might change the way people saw you. Little by little, without noticing, your decisions stopped belonging to your values. They began belonging to other people's reactions. This is one of the quietest forms of imprisonment. No chains, no walls, no locked doors, only invisible expectations, guiding every choice. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire filled with critics, rivals, and people eager to question his every decision. Imagine carrying that weight every single day, yet instead of asking, "How can I convince everyone that I'm right?" he asked a different question. Am I acting according to reason and virtue? Do you see the difference? One question seeks control over other minds. The other seeks integrity within your own. Only one of them is possible. Most people spend their lives trying to edit someone else's perception. The Stoic spends his life refining his own character. One battle has no end, the other has no limit. Imagine standing in front of a lake on a windy afternoon. The surface is constantly changing. Small waves, ripples, reflections that distort every image. Now imagine trying to paint your portrait on that moving water. No matter how carefully you work, the image immediately changes. That is what happens when you build your identity on other people's opinions. Their moods change, their beliefs change, their emotions change. Some admire you today, some criticize you tomorrow, some misunderstand you without ever asking a single question. If your identity depends on those reflections, you will spend your entire life repainting yourself. No wonder so many people feel exhausted. They are trying to control water instead of becoming the mountain reflected upon it. Seneca once warned that the greatest slavery is not physical, it is psychological. It begins the moment another person's approval becomes more valuable than your own conscience. Read that again in your mind. Not your ego, your conscience. These are not the same thing. The ego wants integrity. The ego asks, do they like me? Your conscience asks, did I act honorably? One question creates anxiety, the other creates peace. Perhaps this is why some of the strongest people you have ever met rarely rush to explain themselves. Not because they are arrogant, not because they believe they are always right, but because they understand something most people never learn. Truth does not become more true because it is defended 100 times. Nor does character become stronger because everyone approves of it. A tree does not explain why it grows toward the sun. A river does not apologize for changing its course. The stars do not seek permission to shine. Nature simply fulfills its purpose. Without argument, without performance, without apology. Somewhere along the way, human beings forgot how to do the same. We learned to perform instead of live, to impress instead of become, to defend. And every explanation added another layer between who we truly are and who we believe we must appear to be. But imagine, just for a moment, what your life would feel like if you no longer carried the burden of convincing everyone. Imagine entering a room without wondering how people would interpret you. Imagine making a decision because it aligned with your values, not because it would be universally accepted. Imagine ending a conversation without replaying it 100 times before falling asleep. That kind of peace exists, but it asks for something that most people fear. It asks you to release the impossible responsibility of controlling another person's mind. And that is where our journey truly begins. Because before you can stop explaining yourself, you must first understand why you've spent so many years believing that you had to. Why you keep defending yourself. There is a question you rarely ask yourself. Not because the answer is difficult, but because it is uncomfortable. Who are you trying to convince? Is it the person standing in front of you, or the frightened version of yourself that still believes love must be earned? Think about how often you explain your choices, not because someone genuinely wants to understand you, but because silence makes you nervous. You fear that if you don't immediately justify yourself, people will assume the worst. So you rush to fill the silence. You explain why you couldn't answer the message. You explain why you needed a day alone. You explain why you turned down the invitation. You explain why you're changing your life. You explain and explain and explain until your own truth begins to sound like a request for permission. Have you ever noticed how different confidence feels? A confident person doesn't speak less because they have nothing to say. They speak less because they no longer feel responsible for managing everyone else's perception. That difference is enormous. Most people believe confidence is loud. The Stoics knew it was quiet, because real confidence isn't built by convincing others. It is built by no longer needing to. Somewhere in your life, or perhaps long before you became an adult, you learned that acceptance came with conditions. Maybe you were praised only when you succeeded. Maybe mistakes were met with criticism instead of understanding. Maybe love felt abundant, but only when you behaved exactly as others expected. Without realizing it, your mind formed a dangerous equation. If people understand me, they will accept me. And if they accept me, I will be safe. That belief follows you into adulthood. It enters your friendships, your relationships, your work, even your dreams. Will people approve? You begin measuring
Not,
every
"Is this
decision
right?"
against one
Not,
invisible
"Does this
question.
reflect
My values? Not, will I respect myself tomorrow? Only, will they understand? And the tragedy is that the answer is often no. Not because your choices are wrong, but because people rarely judge your intentions. They judge what they can see. They see you leave. They don't see the nights you cried before making that decision. They see you become distant. They don't see the exhaustion that forced you to protect your peace. They see you say no. They don't see the hundreds of times you said yes while abandoning yourself. How could they? They are not living inside your heart. They only witness fragments of your story. Yet you expect them to understand the entire book. Isn't that impossible? Marcus Aurelius reminded himself of something remarkably freeing. He wrote that every person sees the world through the condition of their own soul. Think about that. When someone judges you, they are not seeing reality exactly as it is. They are seeing reality filtered through their fears, their wounds, their expectations, their disappointments, their experiences. In other words, they are not only reacting to you, they are reacting to themselves. Imagine standing before two mirrors. One is perfectly clean, the other is cracked and covered with dust. Would your reflection be the same in both? Only the mirror. Not.
Has your face
work
changed?
the same way?
Some see kindness, others see weakness, some see confidence, others see arrogance, some see boundaries, others see rejection. Which reflection is true? None of them completely, because every human being interprets reality through the invisible lens of their own life. This realization changes everything. You stop exhausting yourself trying to polish every mirror. Instead, you begin asking a far more important question. Am I becoming someone I can respect? The Stoics never said your reputation was meaningless. They understood that reputation has practical value, but they also knew something that modern society constantly forgets. Reputation is borrowed, character is owned. Your reputation exists in minds you cannot control. Your character exists in choices only you can make. One can disappear because of a rumor, the other survives even when no one applauds. So why do we spend so much more energy protecting the first than strengthening the second? Because the ego is terrified of rejection. The ego whispers, if they misunderstand you, you become smaller. Wisdom whispers something entirely different. If they misunderstand you, nothing changes about who you truly are. That is not easy to believe, especially if you've spent years trying to be the person everyone needed, the reliable one, the agreeable one, the patient one who never disappoints. At first, it feels noble, but eventually, you begin disappearing beneath the weight of everyone's expectations. You smile when you're exhausted. You apologize for having needs. You say yes, while silently hoping someone notices you wanted to say no. And when they don't, resentment quietly begins to grow. Not because other people are cruel, but because you expected them to read a truth you never allowed yourself to speak. Seneca warned that no wind is favorable to the sailor who does not know his destination. Many people spend their lives drifting from one opinion to another. One compliment changes their mood. One criticism ruins their week. One misunderstanding steals their sleep. Why? Because they handed strangers the compass. Imagine boarding a ship, then asking every passenger where you should sail. One says east, another says west. Another tells you to remain where you are. Another laughs at your destination. Would you ever leave the harbor? Of course not. Yet this is exactly how many people live. Every opinion becomes another hand pulling the wheel. No wonder they feel lost. The Stoic does something radically different. He listens, he considers, he remains humble. But when the moment comes to choose, he places both hands back on the helm. Because direction cannot be outsourced. Character cannot be voted on. Purpose cannot be negotiated. Almost invisible. When you realize something extraordinary, you are not exhausted because life asks too much of you. You are exhausted because you have spent years trying to manage stories that exist only inside other people's minds. And that is a burden no human being was ever meant to carry. The day you finally put that burden down, you will discover that peace was never hiding inside the perfect explanation. It was hiding inside the courage to let your life speak louder than your words. Every explanation has an emotional cost. There is something almost invisible about emotional exhaustion. It doesn't arrive all at once. It doesn't knock on your door and announce itself. Instead, it steals small pieces of you. A little today, a little tomorrow, a little every time you sacrifice your peace to protect an image that was never truly yours. One unnecessary explanation. One uncomfortable
more
apology.
attempt
to make someone understand what they have already decided not to understand. None of these moments seem significant on their own, but years later, you wonder why your heart feels so heavy, why your mind never seems to rest, why silence has become uncomfortable. The answer is simpler than most people imagine. You have been spending emotional energy where no return was ever possible. Imagine carrying a bucket filled with water across a desert. Every conversation that forces you to defend your worth punches a small hole in the bottom. At first, the leak is almost invisible. You barely notice it, so you keep walking, you keep giving, you keep explaining, you keep trying to prove that you are a good person, that your intentions were pure, that your choices made sense, that you never wanted to hurt anyone. Then one day, you finally reach the place where you hope to find peace. You look inside the bucket, and there is almost nothing left. Not because the journey was impossible, but because you spent the entire journey leaking yourself away. How many times have you apologized? Not because you were wrong, but because you were afraid someone might leave. How many times have you accepted blame, simply to end the conflict? How many times have you swallowed your own truth, because honesty felt more dangerous than silence? These moments seem harmless. In fact, many people call them maturity. They call them keeping the peace. But there is an enormous difference between protecting peace and abandoning yourself. One creates harmony, the other creates resentment. The Stoics understood something that modern life encourages us to forget. Every decision has a cost, even the decisions that appear compassionate, especially those. Every time you betray your own judgment, your mind remembers. It may not speak immediately. Have you ever agreed to something you desperately wanted to refuse, only to feel strangely irritated afterward? The irritation wasn't caused by the other person. It was born the moment you abandoned your own conviction. Your conscience noticed, even if no one else did. This is why so many people become emotionally drained without understanding why. They believe life is demanding too much from them, but often, life isn't demanding nearly as much as the performance they have chosen to maintain. Think about an actor. For 2 hours, he becomes someone else. He smiles differently. He speaks differently. He moves differently. At the end of the performance, he removes the costume. Imagine if he couldn't. Imagine if he had to continue acting every hour of every day. How long before he forgot who he really was? Many people are living exactly this way. Not on a stage, but in ordinary life. They become whatever the situation demands. One personality at work, another with friends, another with family, another on social media, another in relationships. Each version carefully adjusted to avoid disappointing someone, to avoid criticism, to avoid rejection. Eventually, they wake up with an unsettling feeling. I don't know who I really am anymore. That sentence is heartbreaking. Not because identity has been
Marcus
lost,
Aurelius often reminded himself
buried beneath
that
years
the purpose of
performance
life was not to impress the crowd, but to live according to nature. Today, that phrase is often misunderstood. Living according to nature does not mean escaping into the forest. It means becoming honest again. Children understand this instinctively. They laugh loudly, they cry openly, they ask strange questions. They are unconcerned with appearing impressive. Then, slowly, be careful what people think. The world begins teaching them another lesson. Act normal. Don't disappoint us. Little by little, authenticity is replaced by approval, not because anyone intended harm, but because fear is often passed from one generation to the next. Parents afraid of judgment teach children to fear judgment. Communities afraid of rejection teach individuals to hide themselves. Entire cultures become experts at performance.
while forgetting what inner freedom actually feels like. Epictetus observed that if you wish to improve, you must be willing to appear foolish in the eyes of some people. Notice how radical that idea is. Not convince everyone you're wise, not win every argument. Simply be willing to be misunderstood. Most people cannot do this. Why? Because misunderstanding feels like failure. But is it? Imagine planting an oak tree. Would you dig it up every morning just to make sure everyone approved of its roots? Growth also requires trust. Of course not. You cannot become strong while constantly checking whether the crowd agrees with your direction. Strength grows quietly, invisible at first. Roots deepen long before branches reach the sky. Your character develops the same way. Every time you choose integrity over image, another root grows. No applause, no celebration, no audience, only quiet strength. And yet, Seneca wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Think about how often you've imagined conversations that never happened, criticism that never came, rejection that never arrived. You rehearsed explanations for people who never asked. You defended yourself against accusations that existed only inside your own thoughts. How much of your emotional energy has been spent fighting invisible enemies? The mind is remarkable. It can create prisons without walls. It can invent judges who never entered the courtroom. It can replay a single moment hundreds of times, searching for a version that finally earns universal approval. But such a version does not exist, because human beings do not see reality equally. One person will admire your honesty, another will call it cruelty. One will admire your ambition, another will call it selfishness. One will respect your boundaries, another will accuse you of changing. The same action, which one should you spend your life trying to satisfy? The Stoics answered with extraordinary simplicity: neither. Instead, become the kind of person whose peace does not rise and fall with every opinion, not because opinions never matter, but because your conscience must matter more. This does not mean becoming cold. It does not mean ignoring wisdom from others. In fact, the Stoic welcomes correction. He values truth deeply. But there is a profound difference between accepting correction and living in constant defense. Correction helps you grow. Defensiveness keeps you trapped. One is rooted in humility, the other in fear. Perhaps this is why the wisest people often appear so calm. It isn't because life has spared them from criticism. It is because they no longer mistake criticism for a verdict on their worth. They have learned something most people never discover. Your value cannot be negotiated. Your dignity cannot be voted on. Your character does not become smaller because someone refuses to understand it. The moment that truth settles into your heart, something begins to change. You stop speaking to convince. You begin speaking to express. You stop apologizing for existing. You begin standing quietly inside your own convictions. And strangely, the less desperate you become to be understood, the more authentic your presence becomes. Because people can sense the difference between someone asking for permission to exist and someone who already knows they have that right. And that realization leads to the next lesson, one that frightened even the strongest minds before it finally set them free. Sometimes the greatest act of courage is allowing people to leave with the wrong opinion of you. The first shift in perspective. You don't need to convince everyone who you are. There comes a moment in life when you realize something painful. The more you try to explain yourself, the more you give away your peace. You explain your choices. You explain your feelings. You explain why you walked away. You explain why you changed. You explain why you stayed silent. You explain why you made a decision that others don't understand. And most of the time, you don't even realize why you are doing it. Because beneath all those explanations, there is a hidden wound. The fear of being misunderstood. The fear that people will see you differently from who you truly are. Maybe someone called your patience weakness. Maybe someone interpreted your silence as arrogance. Maybe someone judged your decisions without knowing the battles you were fighting privately. And instead of accepting that some people will never see the full picture, you started fighting an impossible war. the war of controlling someone else's perception of you. But the Stoics discovered a truth thousands of years ago. You have power over your actions. You have power over your character. You have power over your choices, but you do not have power over another person's opinion. And this is where true inner peace begins, because the moment you need everyone to understand you, you become a prisoner of their approval. You allow strangers, friends, family, and even people who barely know you to decide whether you are allowed to feel at peace. The Stoic mind works differently. A Stoic does not ask, "How can I make everyone understand me?" A Stoic asks, "Am I living according to my principles?" Because your character does not become stronger when everyone approves of you. Your character becomes stronger when you remain consistent, even when nobody is watching. There is a difference between explaining yourself to communicate and explaining yourself because you need validation. Communication comes from confidence. Over-explaining comes from insecurity. One creates connection, the other creates exhaustion. Marcus Aurelius understood that we suffer not only because of what happens to us, but because of the meaning we attach to what happens. Someone misunderstanding you is not the problem. The problem is believing that their misunderstanding has the power to define you. Think about how much energy you have wasted trying to prove yourself, trying to change someone's opinion, trying to rewrite someone's version of you, trying to convince someone that you are not the person they decided you were. But here is the freedom you have been searching for. You don't have to win every misunderstanding. You don't have to correct every false assumption. You don't have to defend every choice. Sometimes your life becomes the explanation. Your consistency becomes the answer. Your results become the proof. The strongest people are not constantly explaining who they are. They simply live in a way that makes explanations unnecessary. But understanding this idea is only the beginning, because knowing you don't need to explain yourself is one thing. Living it when emotions take over is something completely different. And that is where the real transformation begins. The transformation begins the power of staying silent, when you could defend yourself. There is a type of strength most people never develop. Not the strength to win arguments, not the strength to have the last word, not the strength to prove someone wrong, the strength to remain calm when everything inside you wants to react. Most people believe silence means weakness, but the Stoics saw silence differently. They saw conscious silence as a sign of mastery, because anyone can react. Anyone can become angry. Anyone can defend their ego. But very few people can pause and choose their response. Imagine someone criticizes you, someone questions your intentions, someone misunderstands your actions. Your first instinct is immediate. I need to explain. I need to show them the truth. I need them to understand. But before you speak, the Stoic asks one important question. Am I responding from wisdom, or am I reacting from emotion? Because many conflicts are not created because everything. People lack explanations. They are created because people lack emotional control. Some people are not searching for understanding. They are searching for a reaction. And when you give them your anger, you give them your power. Epictetus taught that people are not disturbed by things themselves, but by the judgments they create about those things. An opinion only controls you when you allow it to enter your identity. The transformation begins when you understand. Not every accusation deserves a defense. Not every opinion deserves your attention. Not every misunderstanding deserves your energy. Your peace is valuable. Stop spending it on people who are committed to misunderstanding you. The Stoic does not stay silent because he has nothing to say. He stays silent because he understands that not every situation deserves his words. Sometimes your greatest response is discipline. Sometimes your greatest answer is time. Sometimes your greatest argument is the person you become. You don't need to announce your growth. Let your growth become visible. You don't need to prove you changed. Let your actions reveal it. You don't need to tell everyone you are stronger. Let your peace demonstrate it. But life will eventually test this wisdom, because it is easy to stay calm when everything is peaceful. The real challenge comes when life hurts you, when someone betrays you, when something happens that you cannot control, when your emotions demand a reaction. And that is where Stoicism leaves philosophy and enters real life. The test of real life. When you lose control, discover what has been controlling you. There is a difference between understanding Stoic philosophy and actually living it when life becomes difficult. Anyone can talk about patience when everything is going well. Anyone can talk about acceptance when nothing challenges them. Anyone can say they are calm when nobody is testing them. But the true measure of your character appears in the moments when life refuses to follow your plans, when someone disappoints you, when someone betrays your trust, when your efforts are ignored, when you do everything right, and the result still does not come. These are the moments that reveal who you really are, because suffering does not only come from what happens, it comes from the battle inside your mind after it happens. You replay conversations. You imagine different outcomes. You create arguments that never happen. You try to understand why someone treated you unfairly, and slowly, without noticing, you give your peace to something that no longer exists. The Stoics understood this weakness of the human mind thousands of years ago. They recognized that people often suffer twice, first from the event itself, and then from the story they create about the event. A person criticizes you. But your mind creates 100 different meanings. The event is simple. They don't respect me. They think I am worthless. I need to prove them wrong. I cannot let this happen. And suddenly, a single moment controls your entire day. The Stoic asks a different question. What part of this situation actually belongs to me? This question is powerful because it separates reality from emotion. Your response belongs to you. Their opinion does not. Your effort belongs to you. The final character belongs to you. The judgment of others does not. This is what Epictetus called the difference between what is within our control and what is outside our control. And this simple idea can completely change the way you experience life, because many people are exhausted because they are fighting battles they were never meant to win. They are trying to control people who do not want to change. They are trying to receive apologies from people who refuse responsibility. They are trying to force situations to become something they were never meant to become. But peace begins when you stop demanding that reality be different from what it is. Acceptance does not mean weakness. Acceptance does not mean giving up. Acceptance means seeing reality clearly so you can respond wisely. The Stoic does not say, I don't care. The Stoic says, I care, but I will not allow what I cannot control to destroy what I can control. Imagine the power of living this way. Someone misunderstands you. You remain grounded. Someone judges you. You remain focused. Someone leaves your life. You continue walking forward, not because you are emotionless, but because you finally understand that your peace cannot depend on things that are unstable. The world will always test you. People will always have opinions. Life will always contain uncertainty. But the person who masters himself becomes difficult to disturb. And this is where a deeper transformation begins. Because when you stop trying to control everything outside of you, you discover something far more important. The person you have the power to become inside of you. And that is where true strength is born. The birth of inner strength. The moment you stop seeking approval, you begin to become free. There is a moment in every person's life when they realize something profound. The approval they have been chasing was never the source of peace they thought it was. For years, many people live as if they are constantly standing in front of a silent courtroom. They feel judged. They feel evaluated. They feel like they must present evidence that they are good enough. They explain their decisions. They defend their choices. They justify their personality. They try to prove that their intentions were pure. But the exhausting truth is this. A person who depends on being understood by everyone will spend their entire life trying to control something impossible. Because no matter how carefully you explain yourself, someone will misunderstand you. No matter how much effort you give, someone will still criticize you. No matter how sincere your intentions are, someone will still create their own version of your story. And this is where the Stoic discovers a powerful truth. Your peace cannot be built on the opinions of people who are constantly changing. The Stoics understood that the only foundation strong enough to support your life is your own character. Not your reputation, not your popularity, not the approval of others. Your character. Because reputation belongs to the world, but character belongs to you. Someone can damage your reputation with a rumor. Someone can misunderstand your actions. Someone can judge your decisions without knowing your struggles. But nobody can take away the person you choose to become. That is the power of inner strength. Inner strength is not becoming someone who feels nothing. It is becoming someone who is no longer controlled by everything they feel. It is the ability to experience emotions without becoming a prisoner of them. It is the ability to hear criticism without losing your identity. It is the ability to walk away from unnecessary battles without feeling defeated. A weak mind asks, how can I make everyone respect me? A strong mind asks, how can I continue respecting myself? This is the shift that changes everything. Because when you truly know yourself, you stop begging others to confirm your value. You stop needing constant reassurance. You stop chasing explanations. You stop trying to convince people who have already decided what they want to believe. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the opinions of others were outside his control. He understood that a person cannot command the thoughts of another human being. And yet, so many people destroy their own peace trying to do exactly that. They lose sleep over conversations they cannot change. They replay moments from the past. They imagine what they should have said. They create imaginary arguments where they finally prove their point. But the Stoic learns something liberating. The conversation is over. The moment has passed. The only thing that remains is your choice of what you do next. Will you continue carrying the weight of someone else's judgment? Or will you return that weight to where it belongs? With them. Because every time you allow another person's opinion to control your emotions, you give them authority over a part of your life they were never meant to own. Your mind is your territory. Your peace is your responsibility. Your response is your power. This does not mean you stop listening. Wisdom requires humility. A Stoic can receive criticism. A Stoic can admit mistakes. A Stoic can change when change is necessary. But there is a difference between learning from feedback and becoming dependent on approval. One creates growth. The other creates fear. The strongest people are not those who never face rejection. They are those who no longer collapse because of it. They understand, I can be misunderstood and still be honest. I can lose someone's approval and still remain loyal to myself. That is true freedom, because the moment you stop living for acceptance, you finally begin living with authenticity. And something beautiful happens. Your energy changes. Your presence changes. Your relationships change. You stop entering every conversation trying to prove something. You stop looking for permission to be yourself. You become calmer, more intentional, more difficult to manipulate. Because a person who is secure within himself cannot easily be controlled from the outside. But there is one final stage of this journey, because discovering inner strength is powerful. Yet the ultimate victory comes when you no longer feel the need to fight for your own peace. When you reach a place where silence is not a strategy, it is simply who you have become, and that is the final lesson. The person who no longer needs to be understood has finally learned how to understand himself. When you finally stop fighting to be understood, there is a quiet moment that comes after a long internal battle. A moment when you realize you are tired, not physically tired, emotionally tired, tired of explaining, tired of defending, tired of trying to convince people who have already created their own version of you. For years, you may have believed that peace would come when everyone finally understood you. When your friends recognized your intentions, when people who judged you finally realized they were wrong. But the Stoic discovers something much deeper. Peace does not come when the world understands you. Peace comes when you no longer need the world to understand you. This is the final stage of emotional freedom. Because the person who constantly needs to be understood is still attached to something outside of himself. His peace depends on approval. His confidence depends on acceptance. His happiness depends on how others respond. But the person who has developed inner strength understands, my responsibility is not to control the minds of others. My responsibility is to control the person I become. This was one of the greatest lessons of Stoic philosophy. The goal was never to create a life without challenges. The goal was to create a person who could remain steady in the middle of challenges. A calm mind in a chaotic world. A disciplined heart in a world full of distractions. A person who can experience difficulty without losing himself. Think about how much energy is wasted trying to win battles that do not matter, trying to prove someone wrong, trying to change someone's opinion, trying to force someone to recognize your value. But the truth is simple. You cannot force someone to see what they refuse to see. You cannot convince someone who has chosen misunderstanding. And you cannot build your identity on someone else's perception. At some point you must choose yourself. Not from arrogance, not from pride, but from wisdom. Choosing yourself means protecting your peace. It means knowing when silence is more powerful than explanation. It means understanding that some doors close because they are protecting your future. It means accepting that some people will only understand your journey after they see where it leads. And that is okay. The sun does not stop shining because someone closes their eyes. Your value does not disappear because someone fails to recognize it. Your character does not become weaker because someone refuses to acknowledge it. The Stoic walks differently because he understands something most people never learn. Your life is your greatest argument. You do not need to announce your growth. Your actions will reveal it. You do not need to explain your maturity. Your reactions will reveal it. You do not need to convince people you have changed. Your consistency will reveal it. Time has a way of exposing what words cannot. A person who once doubted you may eventually see your strength. But by then, you will no longer need their approval. Because you have already found something greater, you have found yourself. And this is the true meaning of letting go. Letting go does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop allowing things outside your control to govern your inner world. You can love people without needing them to validate you. You can forgive without reopening every door. You can move forward without receiving every explanation you wanted. You can walk away without carrying hatred, because peace is not found in winning every battle. Peace is found in knowing which battles are not worth fighting. So the next time you feel the urge to explain yourself, pause. Ask yourself, am I speaking because my truth needs to be shared? Or because I am afraid of being misunderstood? That question reveals everything, because when you no longer need to prove your worth, you become unstoppable, not because nobody can hurt you, not because nobody will judge you, not because life becomes easy, but because you finally understand where your power has always been, inside you. The world may change, people may come and go, opinions may rise and fall. But the person who has mastered himself carries something that cannot be taken away, inner peace. And perhaps the greatest lesson from the Stoics is this: the strongest person is not the one who controls everyone around him. The strongest person is the one who no longer needs to. Because when you stop fighting to be understood, you finally become free.